Hello and welcome to Real Chat with Kat, the podcast dedicated to igniting your entrepreneurial spirit and empowering you to conquer new horizons. In this podcast, we chat with inspiring entrepreneurs on their journey to success through some amazingly insightful and expansive conversations. These episodes thrive on thought-provoking chats where our guests fearlessly explore their path to success, sharing their experiences, failures, and triumphs. No topic is off limits as we deep dive into the talked about and not so talked about pieces it takes to build a business, overcome limiting beliefs, deal with personal struggles, and everything in between that shapes our lives and our businesses. I'm your host, Kat Polsonelli, creator and founder at The Lotus Effect, where we believe that success is not just about strategies and tactics, it's about cultivating a powerful mindset and creating customized business operations that align with you and your true purpose. Whether it's mastering time management, improving productivity, enhancing leadership skills, or simply fostering a growth-oriented mindset, we'll provide you with the tools and strategies to flourish in both your business and personal life. I'm so excited to have you join us today in this episode, so get ready to feel empowered and inspired as we learn together and from one another on how to rise above challenges, break through limitations, and unlock our full potential. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today on this episode of Real Chat with Kat. I am so excited to have you here with me today, and I have an awesome guest for you guys. So, Heidi Dunstan, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Kat. It's an honor to be here.
Oh, I am so excited for this conversation, you guys. I have been waiting with this one for quite a while. So it's finally here. We finally got it worked out. So I am so excited to bring this conversation to you guys. So Heidi, do us all a favor then as we get started and tell everybody, who you are, what it is that you do, and what got you into this space.
For sure. Thanks so much. So my name is Heidi Dunstan. I'm based in Canada, but I don't love the weather in Canada in the winter. So I'm actually hanging out in Mexico just for fun
Oh,
because it's way warmer here. And because I'm living my life to the fullest because I learned firsthand that life changes in a heartbeat. And I lost my husband unexpectedly in 2018. And I learned firsthand that most people don't know what to do or how to support people who are grieving. So I am a certified grief educator. I teach people what to say and not say to somebody who's grieving so that we don't lose the legacies of those we've lost.
I love this. And I love this so much. Okay, you guys. So we had conversations beforehand and I learned so much about this and the topic of grieving as well, because, when we were chatting, one of the things that we talked about that you educated me on was, when we think of the word grieving, instantly a lot of people go to like the death of someone, right? That tends to be the big thing that everyone focuses on. But, I'd love for you to share with our audience, like you were sharing with me, what the word grieving can actually mean and how many other things are tied to that we don't even really consider grief or grieving over because we're so fixated on what the word is generally used for.
For sure. So grief basically is a normal and healthy reaction to loss or change of any kind. So it isn't just about death. It could be divorce. It could be a relationship breakup. It could be a job change. It could be retirement. It could be a stillborn birth, a miscarriage. It could be a child and their balloon floats away. It could be your teenagers when you take the internet or their cell phones away, right? And all of them are normal responses. And you have to remember that grief is as individuals our fingerprint. None of us do it the same, and none of us do it wrong. We all do it our own way.
I love that so much. And it's, when you talk about how grief is, as individual as your fingerprints, that is so true. And I've noticed that even with my teenagers, right? Especially for boys, because they're the way that they handle a lot of emotions are a lot different than how girls handle their emotions, right? So for instance, I know that especially my youngest one, when he was having some days of like depression. He was going through some stuff with his father who's dropped out of his life and things like that. And I just kept noticing that there was just this anger. And I'm like, why are you so angry about everything? And it was interesting because, I was asking him questions around it, and he was like, I just don't want people to see me upset. And it was so funny too, because my husband happened to be a part of that conversation. And he said, well, yeah, he said, honestly, he said, for me as well, he said, it's so much easier to be angry than it is to be upset. And I was like, what? I mean, that makes sense. And I know that there's been times that I was angry, and it wasn't that I was actually angry. It was because of something else. But it's interesting to see how our emotions like cross over each other. And I don't think that we have a really good understanding on how to pinpoint the actual emotion that we're dealing with. So we just kind of like give it this overall general consensus or label so that we can like move on to the next thing.
Yeah. And I don't know if we talked about this too, but like anger, I always say anger is one letter short of danger,
Mm,
literally. And if you stay in anger too long, it's extremely dangerous. Right. And I always tell people, do you know those lottery tickets you can buy at like the gas station with that you scratch off? Anger
hmm
is like the silver that you scratch off, and there's usually an underlying emotion underneath it.
Ooh, that's a really good way of explaining that.
Right. And so you got to scratch that off to be able to go, I'm really actually sad, or I'm disappointed, or I'm hurt, or, and actually acknowledge that feeling that's underneath it. Because otherwise, when you stay at anger, and I had situations in my life where I stayed in anger for a very long time. It's not healthy. It doesn't
hmm
actually, you never get to that underneath layer. You never get to see and move through that other emotion to see if you're going to win the prize or not, right? Like, right? Like, and so it's really and I mean, it takes some emotional intelligence, a little bit of EQ to be able to go, I need to go deeper. I
hmm
can't just stay there, right? And be gentle with yourselves, right? If you're angry for a reason, and it's okay to say, I'm angry. This is hard, but I need to go a little deeper. I need to see why I'm angry. And give yourself permission to stay angry for a certain amount of time and say it's time to let things go, because that anger is dangerous to you, not to the other people. It could be dangerous to some of the relationships around you because of how you're handling it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that one a lot. That y any emotion that you deal with or you're going through, you want to be aware that you are feeling that emotion, working through that emotion, and then also being able to release it on the other side and not getting just stuck in it. And I know that that's something that I did for a really long time. If I could not explain fully why I was feeling some way, I would get stuck in it so much of trying to like figure it out. But I don't really think allowing myself to go deep enough to understand it. And then you like get in this ongoing cycle of, well, I don't know, I don't get it. What is going on? Why does it keep happening? Right. And then I think that you prolong it so much. And I think that, for me, and I'd love your take on it as well. There have been times where I get emotional or I've gotten a little like stressed out, and I may not have the full and complete like why behind it. I may have kind of an overall understanding, or like, yeah, I know that this probably triggered it kind of a thing. But there have been times for me where it's better for me to know that it's happening, kind of know where it's coming from, and be like, okay, we had 10 minutes, we're done. I I'm good. And like moving the body into something else.
Yeah. And so there's so many points that we can speak on here. So a couple of things. One is, um, why keeps you here,
Mm,
right? And sometimes when it comes to emotions and when it comes to grief, the why doesn't matter. It's about saying, I'm sad. I miss my person. I miss this in my life, and just acknowledging that was important to you. That's enough, because the why doesn't matter, right? Like the reality, why did they die? I don't know. Why did somebody take their life? You'll never know that answer. And if you
Yeah.
want to stay on that gerbil wheel, you'll never get anywhere. And I'm just as guilty. I spent many months of my grief time going, why do I have to go through this? Why is this so hard? Why is that? And know that that why question keeps you in judgment.
Mm.
Because if you can never get the answer, you'll never feel like it's enough. And I believe the judgment is grief's kryptonite. It stops us from connection. It beats us up. It doesn't help us. It hurts us. And so, like you said, it's kind of nice. Like I'm in this emotion. I'm going to let it be there for 10 minutes or 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And then you have to move to something else. And the something else for me was gratitude. Right. And people go, gratitude, like your husband died. How can you be grateful? I'm grateful I had him. And I can't be stuck in those deep, dark hollows of grief when I'm grateful. And so I allowed myself to be there for a short amount of time. And then I allowed myself to be grateful that I had him. Very different process than staying there. And then can I circle back to the very first point you made is we talked about being stuck in emotion.
Mm.
And have you ever had somebody say that to you? I think you're stuck in your grief. That's judgment, 100%. What happens is when you say that to somebody, I think she's stuck in her grief. When we say grief as individuals are fingerprint, we don't get to tell people that they're stuck because they get to do it their way, and their way is the right way. We get to say, I see that this is hard. I see that you're hurting. I see that this is, it's taking you some time. I want you to know you're important to me and I'm here with you. That's a very different statement than I see you're stuck. Because as soon as you tell somebody they're stuck, they feel like they're not good enough. They're not doing it right. Because who's learned about grief? Did you get taught how to grieve?
Yeah, no.
No,
You just got over it, right? You stuff it
yeah,
down in the box, we're good. Move on to the next
exactly.
thing.
Like when your pet dies, nobody teaches you, hey, this is how it goes. And when your pet dies, is it going to be the same as when your parent dies? Or, a friend dies or a sibling dies? No, all of those griefs are going to look different. And so we don't get to say, I'm stuck. We can say, I need some support. I need help. Right. And when it comes to grief, I encourage people go see somebody who specializes in grief. Don't just go see a therapist.
Mhm.
Megan Devine was a therapist for a long time. And then she watched her husband drown, and she has a book called It's Okay to Not Be Okay. And she realized as a therapist, she said a lot of terrible things to grievers because she had no idea how hard it was. I had a therapist tell me 4 months after my husband died, you're doing everything right. I don't think I can support you anymore.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. I was like, I just need four walls where I can just talk about my husband
Mm-hmm.
without feeling like I'm under a microscope. But she didn't have enough grief training to know that I needed that. I needed that space. And it wasn't until I found trained therapists in grief that I was able to have people that held space for me in a really beautiful way. But you don't need to have special training to hold space for people. You really can just say, I don't have words for you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so
I
true.
can't fix this, right? Like,
Yeah. I think that's the
yeah,
biggest thing for people as well is for a lot of us, there is really good intention behind helping someone. There is really good intention usually behind wanting to see where somebody is at and then help them get over it. But I think we also get caught up in some of the middle pieces because of our own issues. Like you said, judgment is one of them, right? So if you feel like based on your beliefs or how your upbringing was that like you should be done with this, then that's one thing. And then you also can get those that want to make it better, but there's also kind of a selfish reason behind it as well, which is I can't handle this. This is uncomfortable for me. And so if you stay in this space, I don't know what to do with you, right? So then we try to force them to like, it's fine. Let's go
Platitudes.
do
Yeah.
this. We should go party. Maybe we can. So then you try to distract them. And again, I get it. Very good intentions usually behind that. And at the same time, it is so important to understand where someone is at in that particular moment. And if you can't handle it, then maybe you should either step away or just not say anything to allow them to kind of deal with it and open up. I know that I had a really hard time with that for a long time when there were certain emotions that I was uncomfortable with people being in. I would like try to help in the beginning and like, oh, no, I feel you can talk. And then it was like, okay, we're really uncomfortable. So do you want to go do something? Do you want to
Yeah.
go get some ice cream? You want to go for a walk? Like, and I don't it's not that that's a bad thing. It's just like you said, we aren't taught how to help people understand what they're going through because we're so, unfortunately, absorbed in our own and we can't figure out our own stuff that it very much limits the way that we are able to conversate, connect, and understand where somebody else is at.
Yeah. And know that nobody says like anybody, I mean, days after my husband died, a friend of mine said to me, I understand grief. I went through divorce. Right. And yeah, there's a ton of grief in divorce. Don't get me wrong, but it is when you make a statement like that, it sounds like a comparison
Mm.
and they're not the same. Right. They're not. Like I didn't choose to leave my husband, right? Like I didn't choose to, and I didn't, I won't ever see him in the mall. I'll never hear his voice again. Like there's no comparison. So those are not the right things to say to somebody. But none of the people that said the wrong things, the platitudes, the all that, right? They never did it with malice. They did it
Hmm.
because they didn't know. And that's why I do what I do, is because it's an uncomfortable topic. And I either had people who were silent, and that silence is deafening, like, do say something. And that's something, if you don't know what to say, is I have no idea what to say, but you're important to me. And I'm afraid that if I say something, it might be the wrong thing. How can I support you today? Which is way different than call me if you need me.
Mm.
I had hundreds of people say, call me if you need me. I didn't know what I needed.
Yeah.
But I did appreciate the neighbor who said, leave your garbage on the doorstep and we'll take it to the bin for you. I did appreciate the people that said, hey, can I set up a meal train, like, which is a website, and people can bring food and you tell us how much you need, how often you want it. And it was like, it's set up so that you don't get 17 lasagnas, right? So people can actually put their like, I'm bringing tacos today and the next person's bringing salad and, you know, so little things like that, right? Like, um, but yeah, like just nobody does it with the intent to hurt. But the hard part is we live in a world where it's like we ask, how are you? Because we want to know that somebody's good, fine, or okay. Asking a griever, how are you? They're not good, fine, or okay. And so I
Hmm.
encourage people to say, how's today? So that somebody can actually be honest with you and be okay with the fact that they're not okay. Be okay with the fact that they might say, I haven't slept, or all I want to do is sleep. Eating by myself sucks. This is hard. I want them back. This hurts. And be okay with that and say, I see that this is hard. Just acknowledge their feelings. That's all they want. They want to be
Hmm.
seen. They want their pain to be witnessed because they're carrying it by themselves and it's hard and it's lonely. Right. And so turning around and saying, hey, how can I support you? You know what? I would love to just go for a walk, or I haven't been able to vacuum, or the grocery store is a landmine. I hate going to buy groceries because I see all their favorite foods, right? You know what? I'd be honored to go get groceries. You know, show up in ways that you wouldn't like. My best friend lived across the street at the time, and he knows I'm a sprinkler. I cry. The day after Mike died, he showed up with the Costco case of Kleenex instead of flowers, right?
Oh.
Like that's a cool way to show up.
Hmm.
Show up with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee and sit on the couch, and you don't have to say a thing. You could just sit there in silence. In those early days, weeks of grief, sometimes it's just sit there uncomfortably in silence and be like, if they want me here and there's nothing to say, because you can't fix it. We live in a world that wants to fix it.
Definitely.
And in grief, we say things like, at least they're not suffering anymore. But the person right in front of you is suffering. You know, God takes the good ones, or everything happens for a reason. You know, there is no reason why I lost my husband other than he had a heart attack, right? Don't sit and ask, like, it's funny. Like I travel quite a bit. I spend a lot of time in Ubers and taxis, and I often get asked if I'm married, and I say I'm widowed. And here are people that don't even live in the same country as me asking me how my husband died. I have to relive that day. Don't ask the cause of death. If you don't know the person, you don't need to know.
Yeah.
Right. So it's about listening generously, turning around and acknowledging that they feel like crap and that they're in pain, and you can't fix it. You can't take it away. They miss their person. They miss whatever's missing in their life, and it's okay. I had a friend phone me a few weeks ago, and I'm like, hey, how are things going? She's like, I'm sad. I said, you're allowed to be sad. And I just heard this sigh on the other end of the line. And I said, what's going on? She goes, thank you. She goes, because I felt like so much pressure that I'm supposed to be good and fine and okay. And I'm like, well, sad is a normal emotion. We're allowed to feel it.
Yeah.
I didn't need to cheer her up.
Yeah, that's a big one, I think, within our society as well is, and I think that goes back to that judgment piece too, is we especially in America, on this side of the planet, we don't allow space to deal with whatever it is that we're going through, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I know that even when I was in corporate and I had friends that are in corporate that like lost a family member and they had like 3 days off to attend a funeral. Like that is not enough for anyone to do anything ever, right? And I get that some people enjoy the distraction and that's their process, and that's fine if they choose it. But I feel like we do live in a society where we are sped through the crappy emotions, the emotions that nobody wants to feel because it's icky or it's uncomfortable, and we act like it doesn't need to be there. And then we push that on other people, right? And again, I don't think it, like you were saying, I don't think it comes from malice. I just think that we just don't understand, how to deal with things.
And we don't want to talk about it because it makes us question our own mortality.
Mm.
Right? So, I mean, you think about it, and I mean, given that you have teenagers, like I don't think our age difference is that big, but I remember as a kid seeing hearses. We don't see hearses very much anymore.
No.
Bodies are transported in white unmarked vans. We don't see death. The world of COVID brought death to a reality, but it wasn't that you saw bodies, you saw numbers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we don't allow for that understanding anymore, right? Like, and you think about it, like I mean, I remember at Mike's funeral, there was a man who was in his 40s. It was his first funeral that he like significant loss, like a good friend that he'd lost. He was in his 40s. He'd never experienced anything like that. Never had a family member die, never nothing, which is, I mean, good in the sense like he's got all his loved ones. But on the
Yeah.
same note, like, there are lessons in understanding some of those hard roller coaster times of emotions, and the curiosity questions. Like kids ask amazing questions at funerals because we do weird stuff. We put people in a box, we open the door and have people look at the body, and then we close the box, and then we don't explain why they're there. And as an adult, we're like, well, that's just the tradition. But from a 4-year-old's perspective or a 6-year-old's perspective, they're thinking it's like a jack in the box, or like, why dad in the, like, why is so and so in the box? Like, when are they going to open the door and let them out? Like, we don't always make sense of that stuff because we don't talk about it, because it's uncomfortable, because it makes us question our mortality. I mean, what happens in grief, it goes even further, is that because it's uncomfortable, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about the person that had passed, which
Mm,
means the person who's passed, their legacy dies because they don't get talked about. And that's the tragic part. That's the hard part for me. My husband was an amazing man. And when like I just was on a flight on Monday, and the guy was like, tell me about Mike. Tell me about your favorite parts about who he was. And at the end of the flight, the best compliment anybody can give me is, thank you for sharing a piece of Mike with me. I wish I had the honor of meeting him. That's a gift to me, because for me, and again, Grace is individual as our fingerprints. Sometimes talking about the people we love is hard for people, and that's not their jam, and I respect that. And
mm-hmm.
also know that sometimes the people that we've lost aren't always good people, right? They maybe some of the legacies they've left behind are ones of pain, so that we don't talk ill of the dead, and I respect that as well. But my husband was an amazing man, and when somebody tells me, I wish I met him, I know I've done his legacy justice, and it fills my heart to be able to talk about him. And that's kind of the present that I get, and I know early on when I hurt in grief, my friends wanted me to feel better because they also grieved that a piece of me died. I wasn't the same,
Mm-hmm.
and so I get that they wanted me to be better, and I am better now, but I'm not the same person I was before Mike died 5 years ago.
Yeah, and that can be super hard to accept as well. And sometimes, when we go through these larger traumatic events, you know, it it teaches you something, or it shows you something, or it makes you aware of something. And sometimes that means that certain things become less precious and certain things become more precious because of what you've been through. And you're so right. It does change who you are as a person. I know that for me, what I was even 5, 6 years ago is nothing compared to where I am now. But that's because I had a lot of trauma. I had a lot of triggers. I had a lot of unhealed aspects of my life. And once I got to the point of wanting to heal it and then understanding the meanings behind it, and like, okay, this is how you accept this. This is why this makes sense, kind of a thing. It just puts your whole world, I feel like, in a completely different perspective, to where certain things that I would have taken precedent, like drama, talking about other people's crap. I could give a damn less to have those kinds of conversations. And if you are that kind of person that's all that you want to do, I quickly remove myself, because that is not worth my time, right? Like that is not important to me anymore.
Because you live
And
life with a different lens.
yeah, and that's so true. For anybody that deals with any type of grief, and being able to see that, and that takes a moment of vulnerability on the other person's side who is not going through it. And that's something that I recently had to learn. So, like, I love Brene Brown, and she talks
Yeah.
about shame, guilt, and vulnerability. And while, yes, a lot of it is kind of more centered around businesses, you can take that anywhere with you, right? And see it and live by it and understand it. And what it taught me was that I have to be very emotionally aware of other people and what they're going through and what I can and cannot help with. And like she says, sometimes you just need somebody to sit in the mud with you. That's it. And
Yeah.
that's hard for us to do.
Yeah. It is. And as a griever, like I had some people that sat in the mud with me. And I can tell you 5 years later, they are still people that I cherish. They are still people that I was like, they showed up, right? They were okay with me bawling my eyes out, like messy crying in a restaurant. And they didn't throw a Kleenex in my face. They didn't say, please don't cry, I'll cry too. They just
Mm-hmm.
let me. Right. I had people who, I mean, the first 3 months after Mike died, I lost 30 pounds. Now, Kat, I had 30 pounds to lose. So it was health wise, that's not the right way to do it.
Yeah.
And I had lots of people who said, Heidi, you look amazing. I didn't feel amazing, Kat. And I had one friend who said, have you lost all this weight because you're not eating? And I said, I hate eating by myself now. I hate cooking by myself. I don't have the ability to cook two things on the stove at the same time without burning them because my brain capacity was so limited. And she's like, I'd like to have you come for dinner and bring some to-go containers so we send you home with some leftovers. And why don't you spend the night and we'll have popcorn or ice cream or whatever you want. That bed is still open. I can go and stay there any day. That is somebody who showed up for me with kindness and saw me and saw a need and leaned in and said, how this is how I can support. Right? Like they showed up, and I will remember them forever because they saw me at a time when I didn't feel like I was able to be seen. Right? I was struggling so much. And so those are those times when you can lean in instead of actually, I mean, I have a friend who's a widow. She watched her friends cross the street and avoid her. You know, Mike and I, there was 3 couples. We all hung out together. I never heard from the other 2 couples after his funeral. That was because I was a reminder to them that Mike died. So it was their grief as well. But there are ways that we can show up for people that are just gentle. And people are like, oh, I don't live in the same city. And I'm like, you can send a DoorDash card or an Uber Eats card so that they don't have to cook. You can mail a grief book. You can send a text every few days, hey, thinking about you. You can mark in your calendar the anniversary of their death and remember on a yearly basis so that 5 years from now, when somebody's going, today's the day I lost my husband 5 years ago, and nobody remembers, and they get a text from you saying, hey, I'm thinking about you today. Not, hey, today's gotta suck. Just say, hey, I'm thinking about you today. I'm remembering your person. I want you to know you're in my thoughts. They don't feel alone. You know, when your neighbor's mom dies, reaching out on Mother's Day, saying, sending you a hug this Mother's Day. I know your mom's looking down on you. We can show up in really beautiful ways, really simply, without it being hard. But I understand and understand why people get silent because the words matter and they're afraid that they're going to mix up the words and say the wrong thing. And when you do say the wrong thing, just say that. Dang, I stuck my foot in my mouth. I'm not good at this stuff, but I'm trying. I would appreciate that a heck of a lot more than the people who are silent.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that too because it's genuinism, right? It's
Yeah, it's authentic.
yeah, you understand and from there you can really take that and the screw ups or the faults or whatever is not what we focus on. It is the simple fact that you came forward or that you made the choice or that you even attempted, right, in some way, form, or fashion. So let me ask you this, because I know that you deal with helping others, excuse me, that are around those that are grieving. What would be some tips that you could share with people in that space? I know you've given us a bunch,
Yeah.
but just a few things that, is a place to start in case you're in that situation.
For sure. Now, acknowledging, like, if you're really close to the person, you're going to have a little bit more information than the average person, right? So, and know that if you don't have, like, so say you bump into me at the grocery store and I'm crying in front of the milk and you don't know me super well, like the conversation always changes. So one, like I said earlier, how's today? Asking how's today rather than how are you? Right? Because when you say, how are you? And I actually don't ask, how are you anymore? I just say, hey, how's your day going? Or how's today? Where are you at? How are you is you're supposed to be good, fine, or okay. And when somebody says they're not any of those, you kind of walk away going, wish I didn't ask. Right? And so when you actually say, hey, how's today? You're actually authentically saying, be real with me. I want to know. Right? And the people around me know that. Know that the platitudes don't work. Everything happens for a reason. They're in a better place. all of that stuff, those platitudes miss the mark. So be real and say, I see this as a significant loss. And know that that loss isn't always about death. I mean, you said you have a son whose dad isn't in his life. He's grieving the loss of somebody who's still alive. That grief will impact him for, because it's, as long as it's still there, it's still grief. And sometimes those are even harder because it's like they're so close yet so far away. Right. And so know that, like I did a podcast recently on parental alienation. That's a significant grief. Right.
Yeah.
But I talked about grief recently on for parents of children who are addicts. They have anticipatory grief all the time. And so know that when people are living in that life grief, it's an endurance. It's not a sprint. They will grieve deeply for a long period of time. And as a supporter, that's hard because we want people to be better. And sometimes it's like, oh, there's Eeyore again. And so know that it's like all they need is grace. And all they need is you to love them exactly where they're at. Leave the judgment at the door. It doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve the relationship. If these people are important to you, you have to love them good, bad, and ugly. And when their life is ugly and they're trying to move through the emotions, you get to be a shine of light of love.
I love that. It's so important. And you're right. It really does come down to understanding where people may be coming from and given the space for that. As we talked about prior to this conversation about all these different types of grief and things that you can go through, one of the things that we talked about as well was the grief of who you used to be and having to let go of that, right? And that in itself is a huge process, from we talked about, I think a little bit about my personal experience. I mean, being in an abusive relationship for 10 years, coming out at 28, I had no clue who the hell I was. And I still feel like for probably a good 5 years, I was wandering around in circles, trying to figure it out or distract myself with everything else because I didn't have time to focus on it, and when I look back at that, I think of that I really was grieving over these pieces that didn't match with me anymore, that I knew that I wanted to let go of, but couldn't understand why I needed to let go of. And it was too scary to understand where I could possibly go because that was the unknown.
Yeah. I mean, the hard part is sometimes we hold on to pain because that's all we know. And it's like, if I let go of this, then what the heck am I? Right. And it's like, there's so much uncertainty and we as humans don't like uncertainty. And so we'd almost hold on to all this crap that's hurt us and that's continuing to hold us back, that it takes a lot of courage to let that go. And people don't understand that. They don't understand, like, one of the phrases that I heard all the time, and I've heard it lots in my life, and I'm sure you have too, just because of your personality, Kat, is you're so strong.
Oh, that one.
I took that badge of honor off a long time ago because what happens is when we tell somebody they're so strong, we're telling them, I don't need to help you. I don't need to know your vulnerabilities. You got this. And when you turn around and say, I see how courageous you are, that's the action that gets them strong. That's the action to say, must have been hard to get out of bed today. That's the action of, I know you've had a rough week. I know that I've talked to you some days and you were still in bed at 4 p.m. and you haven't been out of bed and today you're showered. That's courage. That's not strength. That's courage to move forward. Right. And so I acknowledge the action. I tell people that you're really brave in being open with me. I thank them. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for sharing your tears with me. I believe tears are a language of our heart. And it's not very often that people share those. It's an honor to me when somebody does that. And so don't give somebody that badge of honor, because it's not. When they feel broken, that strength doesn't align, right? When they're going through a major grief, don't turn around and say, I see this hurts. I see this is hard. You're not meant to do this alone. And if you'd like support, I'd be there with you. I might screw it up, and sometimes when you do screw it up, you can actually break the situation a little bit with a little humor. Hey, I said the wrong thing. Let me go get the salt shaker to put in with my foot. Now all of a sudden you got a little levity, and it's like, oh, okay, right? It doesn't have to be hard. Like when the neighbor showed up with the Kleenex, do you think that we were crying when it happened? No, we were laughing. That's hilarious, right? And so know that you can show up. Humor can be a big part of it too, tactfully, right? Like tactfully. And sometimes when a joke doesn't land right, you got to get the salt shaker. But it's like, a little grace, a lot of grace, a lot of love, and the ability to say, I'm not perfect. And asking for forgiveness when needed. And as a griever, I had to ask for forgiveness too. I was raw. And people would say things and stuff would come out of my mouth that wasn't me. Right? I had to apologize to a few people. Hey, I know you're doing the best you can. I didn't need to snap at you. Right? So it has to go both ways. I also say to grievers too, like grievers are like, nobody calls me anymore. Your person died, your fingers didn't break, dial their number. Like,
That's a big thing. Us asking for that support as well. I had a really hard time with that one for a really, really long time. And I think part of that was because I was always the strong one. So therefore, because everybody always told me that, reaching out for help meant I was not strong. And that did become part of my image for a really long time. Like, oh, I can't ask for help. They think I'm strong. They think I've got this. Well, I can't tell them that I don't, because then that means I'm a failure. That means that I'm screwed up. That means I can't do it, right? They're going to have to retract that statement. So I know that that phrase specifically held me in my relationship for quite a while. And that's nobody's fault. It is what it is. But the reality of the facts of that matter is, because that was pushed on me so consistently, I consciously was like, oh, well, I'm strong then. I can't show that I'm weak. And that screws things up in itself as well. And we have to understand that it is okay to ask support. Hell, you should be asking for support. If you are doing it all
you
on
don't
your
need to
own,
should. You have to. It's
yeah,
not even don't should on yourself. You have to ask for help.
yeah,
There's power in asking for help, because one, giving is receiving. And when you're a strong person, you're typically giving to everybody else. And when all of a sudden somebody's able to give to you, you empower that relationship. Right. And I mean, I'm guilty of it too. There's so many times where I didn't allow people to give to me. When Mike died, I was like, I can't do this alone. I can't. I need help. And people were like, thank you for letting me help you. Because I was always like, no, I got this. No. Like when that lady cooked me dinner and sent me home with leftovers, that's grace. That's beautiful. And both of us benefited. And so I always say to people, like, if you don't allow people, if you don't learn how to receive, you're really denying the people that love you the most. One of the biggest gifts is giving to you, because that's what they want the most. That they've received from you. Now it's got to be, and it's not transactional, but it's like it's kind of completing the process.
yeah. It's like a cycle. And you
Yeah.
have to get from one to the next in order to finish it up, close the circle, and move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that so much. Oh, this has been
So
such
many
an awesome
things.
conversation. I know there's so many things. I want to go down so many rabbit holes.
I know.
So I can't thank you enough, Heidi, for coming on here and sharing this side of things with people because it's so easy for us to focus on this positive psychology and positive attitudes. And, you know, you can't have the light without the dark. And we have to remember that. And we so much fear the darkness that we're afraid to tippy toe into it. So we rather stay all the way over on this side. But what that ends up doing is not only hurting us, but it hurts others around us and others that we could be impacting and helping when they are in that mud, in that moment, that they cannot handle things. And so I can't thank you enough for coming on here and just genuinely sharing this piece that a lot of people avoid because it makes them uncomfortable.
It is uncomfortable. It is. And I get it. It's a sticky conversation. But I like the program I run is called Lean Into Grief. It's those moments when you feel like you want to run away. Those are the moments you're meant to lean in and support somebody.
Yeah.
Because you have to remember that when you witness deep grief, it's because they have had deep love. It wouldn't hurt if they didn't love their person.
Yeah, very true. Well, as we come to an end of our
Yes.
conversation, one of the things that I always ask all of my guests is, do you happen to have a quote or a piece of advice you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, love generously, listen openly, so that we can all grieve with grace together.
Oh, I love that so much. It's so beautiful. And, for anybody that's out there that realizes that they would like to learn more or connect with, please share with our audience. How can people find you, connect with you, be in your world?
Awesome. Thanks so much, Kat. It's Heidi Dunstan, HeidiDunstan.ca. And feel free. Oftentimes I have a masterclass, a complimentary masterclass. Check it out. There's a toolkit on my website. And just reach out. I really love to be able to make sure that you've got the tools to support the people around you who are grieving.
I love that so much. And of course, everybody will have all of that information in the show notes. So don't worry, we'll make it super easy to find her links and click and be able to connect with Heidi. So Heidi, again, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing this very almost taboo conversation that people don't want to step into because it lights me up. I love I love this stuff.
Thank you for lighting the dark.
Thank you so much. And to everybody else out there, I hope you got some beautiful takeaways. I hope that, some of this has opened your eyes to how you can conversate with people and just start being very aware of the language that you are using because yes, you do have good intentions. Yes, you do have heart behind it. And there are times where there are certain things we don't need to hear when we are dealing with certain things. And so being aware of the language that you are using can really have a adverse or a beautiful effect on the person that you are speaking with. So, and again, I suggest you highly reach out to Heidi and visit her masterclass and everything as well. And don't forget, until next time, do one thing positive for someone each and every day and see the difference that it makes in your life. So until next time, have a fantastic day. Hello again, and thank you so much for being a part of the podcast today. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought tons of value, we ask that you please share, like, and subscribe. Your support means the world to us and helps us to reach even more inspiring entrepreneurs who can benefit from these powerful conversations. If you haven't already, be sure to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, as this feedback is an amazing gift that fuels our growth and helps us to continually improve this podcast. Looking for an extra dose of inspiration and empowerment? Then be sure to connect with me on social media. You can find me at The Lotus Effect, where I share valuable resources and tips while sharing my own journey of being an entrepreneur. And if you're interested in learning more about my coaching programs and services, be sure to check out my website at the-lotus-effect.com. Once again, thank you so much for being a part of Real Chat with Kat. Your presence and support makes all the difference. Remember, whether you find yourself in the depths of the mud or on the path of growth, we all have a unique journey. And just like the lotus, some of us start in the dirtiest of mud, yet as we rise and grow, we blossom into something beautiful, unique, and truly one of a kind. To all of my visionaries out there, keep rising and growing as you create your own lotus effect.